Hey guys, and welcome to Storytime with Jester. Tonight I'll be continuing the saga of Andor and his companions in my fantasy fiction novel, The Book of Prophecies. We'll be picking up on Chapter 12, where Eric has just discovered something in a room that possibly contains a vampire. Or does it? Chapter 12. Found what? Andor inquired. The sword, Eric replied. What sword? Andor asked. Then realizing, he said, The sword? Eric shook his head in affirmation. Xavier cautiously made his way toward Eric, keeping his distance. The rest slowly walked toward the center of the room. What is he talking about? Marikai said. There's nothing here. All is not as it seems, Jovan discerned. Well then, Xavier declared, let us see what is to be seen. Magic be gone, he said with a dismissal wave of his hand. Suddenly a black coffin appeared in the middle of the room where none was before. By now the group was close enough to also see its contents. Thorfinn, upon seeing the vampire, raised his hammer as if to drive the stake deeper into its heart. As he brought the hammer down, it was met with the blade from the bejeweled sword now in Eric's hands. The two warriors locked eyes as Eric said, Hold your weapon, friend. Nothing evil lies here. Are you mad? Thorfinn protested. Or maybe the priest here has beguiled you with foul magic. Neither is true, Oscar chimed in as he approached the two. Drop your weapons and help me get him out of that coffin, he said in an authoritative voice that, up till now, was not present in the mercenary. Reluctantly, Thorfinn put up his hammer and helped Eric and Oscar lift the vampire's body out of the coffin and carry it out of the room. As they stepped through the secret door and into the chapel, the true nature of the body they carried was revealed to all. Thorfinn nearly lost his grip on the body when the transformation took place. As they lay the body near the altar, it started to move of its own volition. Who is this? Marikai asked. Almost in unison, Eric and Oscar replied, Prince Thomas. The Prince of Folkreach? Marikai asked. Yes, Oscar confirmed. I thought he was dead, Marikai said. Lost, Jovan said. Kidnapped and imprisoned, Oscar corrected. Suddenly a green glow streaked through the secret door and past the group. As they turned, they saw the prince holding the bejeweled sword Eric had found. He slowly stood up and spoke for the first time in many years, and now released. Andor's Journal. God's Day, 7/12/25. Over the winter, friendships have grown. Myself and Oswald have grown closer over a warm ale or two by the fire, in between his game of draughts with Hawkeye. He deems himself the village champion, nay, best in the Viscounty. However, I believe he's met his match in Hawkeye. Jovan and Lockru have shared their love of nature, spending many an hour walking and talking in the grove. Xavier has been learning and growing in the arcane arts under the tutelage of the Mage of the Tower. Marikai has spent much time courting the spinster woman from the farm by the pond. Kelwin made many friends amongst the children of the village. His good humor and ability to be a most excellent hide-and-seek player has won the hearts of the little ones. The woodcutter seems to have taken a liking to Thorfinn. During the New Year festival, the two went at it in a tree-cutting contest. Thorfinn won't admit it, but the woodcutter bested him by half a second. Since then, the two have enjoyed many an ale at the inn together. As for Eric, he and the canoness Elfrida have spent much time in commune with the archcleric of Venesk. Eric looks troubled after each of these meetings. However, he won't discuss or even admit that all is not well. And that ends part 1 of part 1, The Lost Prince. Now we go to the Fair Maiden to wrap up part 1. The acolytes laid the old priest on his cot and covered him with a blanket. One of them lit a candle on his desk and joined the others at the door. Then, as a group, they exited the room, closing the door behind them. The old priest laid there, his eyes glazed over, staring into nothingness. His body suddenly tensed as a woman's scream tore through his mind. He hardly had time for his muscles to relax before he heard it again, the sound of excruciating pain. In a small room with a dirt floor, a woman was at the hearth, retrieving a kettle of boiling water. With strips of cloth draped over her shoulder, she carried the kettle over to where another woman was laying, her legs propped up and her skirt hitched up to her waist. As the midwife set the kettle down and began soaking the strips of cloth, the woman let out another ear-piercing scream. A doula pulled back the woman's raven tresses and dabbed a cold compress on her forehead, trying to comfort her. "It's almost here," the doula whispered, trying to soothe the pregnant woman who lay there drenched in her own sweat as the delivery had been long and laborious up till now. "Push, dearie," the midwife said. "Push." The woman took several quick breaths and did as the midwife had commanded. With one hard push, the baby came forth. It was limp in the midwife's arms, unmoving and not making a sound. "What's wrong?" the woman asked, seeing the distress on the midwife's face. "Give me the baby," she demanded, knowing full well of what she would see. Reluctantly, the midwife handed the baby over to the woman. Its skin had a bluish tinge, and its lips were a dark blue. The skin on its hands and feet were wrinkly. Whether due to the pain, the loss of blood, the realization that the baby was dead, or a combination of these, the woman passed out, the baby laying on her breast. "Take the baby and dispose of it," the midwife commanded the doula, "and don't return here. Now go!" The doula did as the midwife commanded. Once alone, the midwife went to work on delivering the second child. The midwife was determined to deliver the baby normally, without the necessity of using a knife. Finally, after relying on all of the skills she could draw from, the second baby came forth healthy and strong. She wrapped it in swaddling clothes, and after seeing to the mother, who was still unconscious, she stole away into the darkness with the baby. The old priest lay on his cot, drenched in his own sweat, as his eyes so slowly closed. In his office, another priest closed the book of prophecies, blew out the candles, and left the room. In the darkness, unseen by anyone, the book opened to the first blank page, and writing began, appearing as if it burned there. Chapter 13. The Shady Dragon Inn was bustling with patrons when Andor entered and made his way to the trestle. The heat of the high summer day had taken its toll on him, and he was ready to quench his thirst with some of Oswald's finest. As he was about to hail his busy friend, Hawkeye appeared beside him and beat him to it. "Oswald, another round for me and my friends," he said. Then noticing Andor, "And one for Andor here as well." Oswald, visibly frustrated, said, "You do have a wench serving you. Why must you bother me?" "Aye, we do, and a cute lass she is," Hawkeye replied, as he gave Andor a wink and sly grin. "But our thirst is mightier than our patience." Oswald returned with 7 mugs of ale, placing one in front of Andor and the other 6 in front of Hawkeye. "Here's 2 for each of you. Now be gone." Hawkeye grabbed up the brew and made his way over to the table where Xavier and Devon were. "That be an unlikely trio," Oswald said, nodding in their direction. "Aye, they are indeed," Andor agreed. Oswald returned to his duties, leaving his friend with the ale. After a couple of hours, and many an ale, the patrons dwindled to just a few. It was then that Oswald poured himself an ale and joined his friend at the trestle. "I know none of ye have spoken much of your time away from us this past season," Oswald said, "and I've seen the scars on the wrists of the lot of ye. I was hoping you'd shed some light on what happened, if you're able." With the mention of the scars, Andor grasped one of his wrists and stroked it as if remembering something painful. "You know this past spring we went to the coast to celebrate the Feast of St. John?" Andor asked. Oswald nodded in remembrance, so Andor continued. "Shortly after the feast was over, the manor we were staying at was attacked by pirates. In our efforts to track them down, we were captured. I was knocked unconscious, and when I awoke, I was aboard a slave ship, shackled at the wrists and ankles. All of my equipment and possessions had been stripped, and I was thrown in the hold with the rest of the slaves and forced to row. For 2 months we were aboard that cursed ship. May a cudgel strike swiftly on the head of the captain and crew. One day, when the ship was offloading cargo, we managed to escape. Within a couple of days we found shelter, but having been stripped of everything we owned when we were captured, we had to obtain jobs just to survive. The city we found ourselves in was a breeding ground for thugs, cutthroats, and other miscreants, and the like, who would just as soon kill us as talk to us. Most of us found work chopping wood, digging graves, cleaning stables, and the like. Jovan was able to find a job with a teamster, and Hawkeye, well, Hawkeye was Hawkeye. The streets of Hedby were a filthy and disgusting, crowded place, common in humanoid-ruled towns. Much trade passed through here, being loaded and unloaded on the many ships that made Hedby one of their ports of call. Having come from the hold of Marladron, Xavier was used to seeing slaves being sold on the blocks in open markets, but having just narrowly escaped such a fate himself, and the time spent rowing on the slave ship, he saw this affair in a much different light. To everyone's surprise, when looking for jobs, Xavier chose the occupation of gravedigger. It hadn't appeared that he had ever done any menial labor in his entire life, and to look at his hands, that was a fair assumption. Yet there he was, laboring in the heat of the day, shovel in hand, digging the grave of some poor sot who either lost his life in some act of violence, or from the beating or lashing he suffered at the hands of his taskmaster. It was the latter in which, while their bodies were being deposited in the hole he just created, he lingered for a while before proceeding to the next. Hawkeye had found a discarded jester's outfit in a pile of clothes that accumulated from that of the deceased. After trying it on for size, he found that it fit rather well. He then rummaged through the wood remnants of old coffins until he found a couple of sticks roughly 3 feet in length. One he carved into a makeshift sword. The other he decorated with baubles he found on the street, and topped it off with a ball of golden cloth. He then found a mishmash of old colorful rags. He convinced Kelwyn to don them, and told him of his plan. The two of them hung out near the tavern district and awaited the wenches. Devon, for lack of finding suitable labor, dressed in rags and sat against a nearby building begging for alms, everyone thinking him to be a blind beggar. As the wenches walked by on their way to and from the taverns and inns, Hawkeye sprang into action. With the wooden sword in his belt and the bedazzled wand in his hand, he would approach and walk alongside a wench, asking, "So tell me, my lady, are you a damsel in distress?" Most would look at him strange, and their reply would be, "No," at which he would respond with a grin and a wink, "Well, would you like to be?" Some would actually reply yes to his initial question, but no matter the first response, more often than not, he'd get the unsuspecting wench to stand in the center of the street and hold his wand. "Now stand right here and hold this," he'd say, guiding them to where to stand, and then he'd pull out his wooden sword. Now on occasion a wench would be taken aback at the sight of his sword, thinking that he was about to assault her, but most played along. Then with an abrupt shout he'd say, "Ah, princess, look!" pointing to Kelwyn in his ridiculous garb, "An evil dragon! Don't worry, I'll save you!" And with that last declaration, Hawkeye would rush over to Kelwyn and whack him on the arse and pretend to stab him with the wooden sword, at which time Kelwyn would fall to the ground as if slain. "Ah, princess," he'd continue, with hands raised high in victory, "I've slain the evil dragon," and bowing deeply, "Now you are saved." By this time a crowd would have gathered to witness this spectacle, and when it was over, Kelwyn, still lying on the ground, would produce a cup for coins to be dropped in. Hawkeye would likewise produce a cup in one hand, and with the other slipped around the waist of the wench, try to procure a place to stay for the night. Needless to say, the duo of Hawkeye and Kelwyn produced more coinage than did the poor blind beggar. "So how long did you have to live in this manner?" Oswald asked. "Well, like I said," Andor replied, "we had no armor or weapons, or anything really. A few days after escaping the slave ship, a mysterious bundle appeared in my room. It contained some of our rather personal but mundane items that had been taken from us. Then one night our luck turned for the better. We had all gathered in a tavern to discuss our plans moving forward, and to find out if anyone had learned anything about the slavers, when we noticed a very rowdy, and very drunk, group of cutthroats boasting about their most recent success in murder and thievery. We awaited for them outside and ambushed them in the alley. They won't be murdering anyone anymore. We relieved them of all their equipment and were now sufficiently supplied to pursue what we had learned about the slavers. We tracked them to their hideout in a dormant volcano located in the Sutter Butts at the southern tip of the eastern coast. I don't know if it was our inexperience or the gods punishing us for what we did to that gang of cutthroats, but we found ourselves captured once again and held prisoners in the slavers' dungeons beneath the volcano. We managed to escape, but as we reached the surface, the extinct volcano erupted. Just prior to that, an earthquake hit the area, destroying much. Everyone was fleeing to the docks in an effort to gain passage out of sure death. The group was half naked, dressed only in loincloths. They were poorly armed. Only 3 of them had weapons. Andor wielded a human thigh bone, and Eric and Marikai carried wooden sticks. Xavier had several scrolls containing spells at his disposal. The rest had only their fists, giving a new meaning to hand-to-hand combat. The docks area was a sea of mass confusion and violence as everyone attempted to escape the doomed crater city. Battles erupted at the few fishing boats tied up in an effort to gain passage to the far shore. The slavers were on a pier by themselves, loading their own ship with all they could salvage from the unexpected catastrophe, unmolested by the masses due solely to their reputation. As the group made their way to the pier, Xavier used his scrolls to bolster their abilities, including making himself and Kelwyn vanish. Viewing a group of mercenaries gathered on the dock, Xavier unrolled one of the scrolls and prepared to read. Not wanting their adversaries to gain an advantage, they quickly advanced on the ship. Xavier began to read from the scroll, and as they were about 20 yards away from the mercenaries, Xavier spoke the last word of the spell. Immediately 10 of the mercenaries fell to the ground, leaving only a surprised ogre standing there with his 2-handed sword. The rest of the group charged, sprinting past the now visible mage. Eric reached the ogre first and swung his club at the ogre's skull. Marikai arrived seconds later and began assaulting the ogre's torso. Jovan grabbed a sword from beside one of the sleeping mercenaries and ran toward the ship. When he reached the edge of the dock, he leaped into the air and, like a spider, clung to the side of the ship. There he began climbing to the top. Kelwyn, invisible, took a dagger from one of Xavier's victims and made his way to the gangplank. At the first sight of the party, one of the slavers aboard the ship, a brown-robed priest, called out a warning to the others and began casting a spell at Xavier. A huge half-orc dressed in leather armor shouted a battle cry, ran down the gangplank, and rushed at the trio fighting the ogre, a dagger in each hand. A beautiful female dark elf cast a spell at Andor and then began looking for her next target. A multicolored pattern, akin to the reflection of light from a prison, appeared in the air in front of Hawkeye and Devon. At the railing of the ship, a man in a purple pointed wizard's hat and orange robes was waving a stick of incense in the air. Devon never saw the pattern of colors. Hawkeye, however, stood frozen, transfixed upon the ever-moving colors in the air. As Devon was moving toward the sound of battle, he heard a splash in the water near the ship. He was apparently the only one in his group to notice. At the same time that Jovan was leaping to the side of the ship, a man in red pajamas leaped over him and onto the dock near Devon, armed with nothing but his bare hands. Devon heard the man's feet hit the dock, but was more intent on finding the source of the splash. The ogre, despite his size, was no match for the pair of fighters armed with clubs. As his body hit the pier with a loud thud, the half-orc let his daggers fly and drew his sword. The daggers found their mark in Eric and Marikai, but luckily for them, the half-orc's aim was slightly off due to his rage. Eric, with his newfound strength, defended the blows from the half-orc's sword and countered with his club to the head. Marikai, adept with daggers himself, dropped his club and simultaneously pulled the daggers from himself and Eric. With a quick lunge toward the half-orc, Marikai plunged both daggers into the dazed half-orc's carotids. The monk moved to attack Devon, who he assumed was an easy target for his martial arts. Unbeknownst to him, however, Devon had also been trained in a monastery. Devon's skills at empty-handed combat wasn't near as good as the monk's, so all he was able to do was fend off any blows designed to be instant kills. As a result, the monk was beating Devon to a bloody pulp. The illusionist at the railing, seeing the demise of the half-orc, broke concentration on the hypnotic spell and sent a wave of fear at the pair of fighters. Eric was the only one not affected as Marikai dropped his daggers and fled. The dark elf, with a wave of her hand, began levitating Eric off the pier. That is, until Kelwyn's dagger penetrated her heart from behind. As Jovan was climbing over the railing of the ship, the priest shouted, "Dive!" at him. Unable to resist the priest's enchantment, Jovan obeyed, diving into the water below. Andor turned in the direction of the sound of Jovan's body hitting the water, but in doing so put his back to the wet thief that was sneaking up on him. The monk drop-kicked Devon's limp body into that of the dead ogre. As he draped himself over Devon, ready to inflict the coup de grace, Devon grabbed the two-handed sword that was the ogre's and impaled the surprised monk. As he had laid there awaiting the monk's approach, Devon's ears finally located the source of the splash. He quickly pivoted his body, pulled the sword out of the dead monk's gut, and hurled it at Andor. It flew by Andor and embedded itself into the thief's chest just as he was about to stab Andor in the back. She dropped her jeweled dagger as her body was propelled backwards by the force of Devon's throw. Realizing his life was in jeopardy, the priest touched the ring on his finger and was about to intone the word that would spirit him safely away, when he found himself suddenly paralyzed. Back on the pier, Xavier had just finished casting another spell from one of his scrolls, holding fast the priest where he stood. Xavier had not been affected by the priest's attempt to silence him. The wizard turned to run, but Kelwyn was upon him before he could get more than a few steps away. Jovan, no longer under the spell of the priest, climbed back up the ship and, seeing what he thought was an unsuspecting victim, cut the immobile priest down. After stripping the slavers of all their equipment and possessions, the bodies were dumped in the lake. The group loaded the ship with all the ex-slaves they had found and sailed to the far shore. Andor's Journal. Moon Day 39, 1225. Many a change has taken place here in Henwick while we were gone. The trading post changed owners. The previous ones were found to be spies for the temple. Since the change, it has become quite prosperous. Several new families have built homes or farms and now reside here. Canoness Elfrida has taken on several underpriests. Our old friends are still here, alive and well. Much to Marikai's delight, the spinster woman is still that. I believe that was his first stop upon returning. Sunday, 43, 1225. The arch-cleric has contacted Elfrida. It seems he has discovered something north, around the lands of Pelindava. God's Day, 48, 1225. Canoness Elfrida came to me today and informed me that the arch-cleric has plans for me and my companions once the winter snows recede next year. What that is, she nor he won't say at this time. God's Day 7, 1226. The arch-cleric of the Nask sent word to me that he wants us to go into the Fagaras Mountains and search for a set of caverns where an ancient wizard purportedly had a treasure hoard. Earth Day 7, 1226. After supplying for the long journey ahead, we set off north for the Fagaras Mountains. A messenger has been sent to Thorfinn in the northern steppes to join us in the capital of Brandenburg. Earth Day 12, 1226. We've reached the southern tip of the Fagaras Mountains. Thorfinn joined us in Marikai's home city of Thornwald. The journey from Henwick has been uneventful. Free Day 12, 1226. We encountered a Eurasian border patrol from the Kingdom of Ban. The patrol numbered about 20. Star Day 13, 1226. Jovan spotted a Knoll raiding party numbering about 30. We were able to avoid them by skirting around their camp. Sunday 13, 1226. A very noisy goblin raiding party numbering about 80 were traveling north through a minor trail towards the Vresels forest. We hid in the trees and lay in ambush. We decimated them in a matter of minutes. Not one escaped. God's Day 13, 1226. We met a group of mountain tribesmen along the trail. Seeing Kelwyn, they informed us of a veil of gnomes back in the direction we came. As we were still in need of rest and healing, they agreed to escort us to the Vale. Water Day 13, 1226. We enter the Gnome Vale. Gnome children swarm us, waiting to hear of our heroic tales, especially of how we defeated the goblin raiders just days ago. We are introduced to the gnome leader, Laird Tanwin. We tell him of our destination and, looking at our map of the area, he points out a general location. It is southeast of where we currently are, and we will still have to backtrack a little. Earth Day 13, 1226. We leave the Gnome Vale, rested and healed of all our wounds, and head southeast. Free Day 13, 1226. We come upon 3 hill giants who want a tribute to pass. As we are not in the mood for a fight, we pay them. Our paths will probably cross again on the way back. Chapter 14. The port city of Mazaron was bustling with activity. The midsummer festival would be here in a few days. Merchants from all over were arriving in the city preparing to buy and sell. Local merchants were preparing their shops for the influx of customers that would be perusing their wares for purchase. The harbor was full of ships from every coast, the horizon dotted by their many sails flapping in the wind. Down at the wharf, the longshoremen were unloading their cargoes and storing them in warehouses. Xavier was excited about the festival, but for not the same reason as most. This festival marked the completion of his studies in the arcane arts, and was when he'd receive his own spell book and be sent out into the world as a true wizard. He would soon be sailing north up to Fairfield, where he would embark on his new life. Today, however, he was at the docks for a different purpose. His master had purchased something of great value and was expecting it to arrive via ship today. Xavier was to go down to the docks to secure it. His master told him the ship would be identified by a red sail. Xavier didn't like going down to the docks. The whole place stunk of garbage, fish, and piss. The people who frequented the inns and taverns in this district were lower than low class. They were nothing more than vermin and scum in Xavier's eyes. Although he grew up in Togo, another port town down the coast, he couldn't swim, and as a result he feared the water. If it were up to him, he'd take the caravan to Fairfield, but his master was paying for him to go the way of the river, so he had no choice. As he neared the ship with the red sail, he noticed a beautiful young blonde girl approaching him from that direction. She was being escorted, rather harshly he noticed, by a brute of a man. By the man's attire, Xavier took him to be a pirate, as were the majority of the sailors that called Mazaron their home port. "Yo, bookworm," the pirate called out to Xavier. "Where might I find the wizard Galen?" "I'm Galen's apprentice. What do you want him for?" Xavier replied, rather put off by the insult. "I've got a package for him," the pirate answered with a sly grin. "Are you from the ship with the red sail?" Xavier asked, pointing to the ship behind them. "Aye, that I am." "Well, I'm here to pick up the package. Where is it?" Xavier inquired. "Right here," the pirate said, and busted out in laughter as he shoved the girl at Xavier. "Tell your master when he's done with this one, the captain has more to sell." Then looking down at the disheveled young girl, he added, "I hope he enjoys her as much as we did." Then he turned and walked away, laughing. Xavier extended his hand to the girl and helped her up. "Master Galen is nothing like those scum," he attempted to console. "Tell me, what is your name?" As she met his gaze, he was lost in her big, beautiful violet eyes. "Miranda," she replied. "My name is Miranda." And that, my friends, is where we will end for tonight's reading. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to join me next Wednesday night when I continue the saga of Andor and his companions, picking up where we left off here at chapter 15 of the Fair Maiden. As always, please hit the subscribe button, like and share my content with all your friends. Leave comments in the comments section, because I do enjoy those immensely. And until next Wednesday night, and as always, see you soon.